Are we? And we are recording and we're live. And hello, Lorie. Hello, Samuel.
Sam.
Hello, Julie.
Sam. Okay, we'll call you Sam. We'll be less formal tonight. How about that?
Thank you.
Absolutely. Welcome to Virtual Warwicks, you two.
It's great to be here.
Excellent. I'm going to give Facebook a minute or two just to advise people that we're live now and so that they don't miss any of this wonderful conversation. But if they do, for some reason, we are recording it. It does stay live on Facebook it does stay resident on Facebook. So they can always come back if they need to step away or want to come back and see it later. It'll be on our YouTube channel, or they can come back here to Facebook to see it too. Couple of housekeeping things, just for people who may not know. Lorie, where are you calling in from? Are you here in San Diego?
I am, yes.
Okay. And Sam, you're here in San Diego as well, correct?
Well, you're my neighborhood bookstore.
There you go. I love that. So I'm assuming that most people who are tuning in are familiar with Warwicks in La Jolla, but just in case they aren't, we are located in San Diego, La Jolla, California. My little sign there says 1896. We're actually celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. So, yeah, 2 pandemics, 2 world wars, lots of things have happened in those 125 years. We're culminating with an open house. Sam, if you're around the neighborhood, and you too, Lorie, on the 21st, we're going to celebrate with an open house. So come on by. We're doing a little champagne toast at one. We're going to do it at 125. Love that.
Of course. That sounds great.
Of course we are. So anyways, so Sam and Lorie are going to chat tonight for about 35 minutes. In the comment section on Facebook, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's not live, so we're not seeing those comments that are coming in. But in the comment section of Facebook, I'm actually going to put Sam's book, CRACKUP, in there. And if you are in the San Diego area, you can click on that to either pick it up in the store, or we actually can ship that to you. So easy to get Sam's book from us. And in that comment section as well is where you're going to put any questions that you have for Sam. So go ahead and pop those in. Don't be shy. I will feed those into Lorie and she'll bring them into Sam when they're done with their conversation. So I think I've given Facebook enough time to notify people that we're here and that we're live. So let me do my introduction of these 2 wonderful people and I will go away. Sam, I know you want me to call you Sam, but your bio has Samuel all over it. So I'll try to make the change.
Either way is fine. It's still me. You're not calling me late for dinner. So
exactly. Just trying to do a good introduction of you. Sam Popkin is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at UC San Diego. Prior to that, he taught at Yale, Harvard, and the University of Texas. He received his BS in Mathematics and Political Science and his PhD in Political Science from MIT. I'm going to call you Dr. Popkin now. Is author of The Candidate, which the New York Times hailed as, quote, management Bible for the business of presidential campaigning, and an editor's choice. Dr. Popper's previous book, The Reasoning Voter, has been hailed as a, quote, classic by Joe Klein in Time magazine and is widely cited in Washington. Sam has consulted for polling, targeting, and strategy in the presidential campaigns of Al Gore, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and George McGovern, and was part of a group of decision theorists advising the Obama campaign in 2012, as well as consulting for polling with CBS News and YouGov. Sam, I love this. Sam also played Ronald Reagan for Jimmy Carter in the practice debates held before the 1980 Carter-Reagan debate. I love that. He's here today to talk about CRACKUP, the Republican implosion and the future of presidential politics. Joining him is Lorie Hearn. Hi, Lorie.
Hello.
Lorie is a lifelong newsaholic and truth seeker. Her passion is investigative accountability journalism, the type that holds powerful people to answer the public. She founded iNewsSource, an award-winning investigative nonprofit newsroom in 2009, after decades of reporting and editing in newspapers on both coasts. iNewsSource stories can be heard and seen regularly on KPBS and CBS 8, and nationally through partnerships with NPR, PBS NewsHour, and the USA Today Network. Lorie retired from the San Diego Union Tribune, where she had been a reporter, Metro editor, and finally the senior editor for Metro and Watchdog Journalism. Reporters and editors on her staff were part of the Pulitzer Prize-winning stories that exposed Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham and led to his imprisonment for taking bribes from government contractors. Graduate of the University of Delaware, Lorie has a Nieman Foundation Fellow at Harvard University in 1994 to 95. You two have a great conversation. See you in a bit.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you
So
very much.
Sam, it's great to be here with you, and I'm presuming with all your fans. And I'm excited to have this conversation.
We'll find out if you have any fans after this book.
Oh, I think you'll have a lot more fans, maybe different fans. So I can say that CRACKUP is a fascinating read. I have read the book, and it's a rather smooth one at that, even for folks who are not political wonks. It really helps to illuminate so much of what we're staring down today as a country. So let's just jump into our conversation. As Julie just noted, you are known for your work on voting, public opinion, campaigns. You've done countless surveys and worked on presidential campaigns. Why did you write a book about political parties?
My last book was about the ways that candidates have to adjust for the different ways voters look at challengers, incumbents, and vice presidents or somebody else who follows a president of their own party, which I called successors. And I wanted to show how much difference there was in the way people looked at them. But I thought an important theme in the book, but one that didn't get picked up by people, was that a lot of very sharp, nasty elbowing and fighting among potential rivals in the House and Senate and governors occurs trying to shape the party in a way that you look like the best person to accomplish what the party wants to do. That the party has a plan and you're the best one to go that way. And that involves sometimes drastic changes in where the party is going so you don't fall off the cliff again. And I thought that would be a chapter talking more about from Tom Dewey being sabotaged by Senator Taft to Dewey's revenge getting Eisenhower to run in 1952, or the very subtle ways Richard Nixon prepared to follow Goldwater, or the ways that the Democratic Leadership Council built up a team of supporting senators and governors that made Bill Clinton eventually a feasible candidate. And then as I was starting the chapter, and people would say to me in talks, well, is Hillary going to win? And assuming this was right after Obama had won in 2012, and without thinking about it too much, I said, well, it depends on how much damage Ted Cruz does. And that was the thing that struck me was there's always intra-party battles and there's always these tensions, but I'd never seen anybody before able to walk over the U.S. Senate and terrorize people with deceptive and demagogic behavior like Cruz. Joe McCarthy insulted the world, insulted the State Department, claimed there were communists everywhere, but he was very careful with people in his own party. They didn't like him, but he behaved much better than Cruz in terms of his own party. Cruz was trying to be a hated insider as a way of proving he was an outsider, calling people to be brave enough to vote for things he knew would never work so that he would be the only one who voted for it and would stand out. And that made me realize that parties were in trouble as I had understood them as a fact of life that would never change. And I realized when the Republican Party couldn't control Ted Cruz, and that was the more organized party historically, I realized the legislative parties were losing the resilience needed to build consensus and be credible as a party that had, in the words of one scholar, a past to honor and a future to defend. And this made me realize that the House and Senate leaders of the two parties were the last remaining line of defense to hold parties together. All the changes in money and finance and media had left nothing to support them.
Let me ask you this question about the parties, Sam. In CRACKUP, you write that parties are a necessary virtue, kind of a twist on the saying about things being necessary evils. You've given us kind of a walk-up, but why don't you paint a picture of what American democracy looks like when the parties are working, when the system is working?
When the system works, the parties have big, nasty fights within the party, and they only advance legislation that has wide support within the party that will not cause the party to lose power and lose seats. You know, something you can pass without being thrown out of power and letting the other party override it immediately. So you're thinking of the future and you're working together. And this requires the party leaders to have carrots and sticks, something they can reward you for holding your nose and voting for something that isn't particularly what your constituents want, that you'll have to defend, or threaten you with losing a committee position or power if you go against them, or taking away your funding. So this was a part of building it. Now, getting things done does not mean everything was good. Remember that Social Security only passed by excluding farm laborers so that the Southern Democrats would vote for something that was mainly, in their minds, only for whites. So let's not pretend that when a party comes to, there's always something you can say is immoral the party didn't do. Not enough for endangered species if you're doing environmental work, or not enough for the newborn if you're worried about families, or not enough to stop abortion if you're against abortion. There's always somebody who claims it was immoral that you didn't do more for my group. But they got things done, and the dirty linen was not aired in public in nasty spats with each other. It was almost kept out of the media.
Can you think of a really good example? I mean, you've given us the Social Security example as kind of a, one we talk about morality, but can you think of an example where the parties were really working together and getting something achieved for the American people without extremes?
Well, an example is the infrastructure bill we just passed. It divides the Republican Party, but Mitch McConnell has praised the bill, even though House members are being threatened for supporting it. And after nasty fights about whether or not somebody from West Virginia should do something that was popular in California, even if it would be unpopular in his state, the bill got passed. That's the current example I can point to. There are others we don't hear about much, small bills on improving the way certain parts of government procedures are handled. But the most obvious one today, and it's a rare one, is the infrastructure bill, which would have even been more nonpartisan, more bipartisan, if we didn't have a certain set of troubles with former candidates and former presidents right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we get to the former president, let's talk about a topic that CRACKUP really focuses on as a key part of the CRACKUP of the parties, and that's campaign finance. Again, I'd like to ask you why you're tackling that topic. The big fights in Washington are about immigration and healthcare, taxes, trade. Those are arguably things people really care about. So why the focus in your book on campaign finance?
Because that's where the campaign finance reform, starting with the McCain-Feingold Act of 2002, which was designed to cleanse parties by taking the big donations that went directly to the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee or to the House and Senate leaders of the parties. That was designed to say, the argument was the parties will work better if the money is kept out of the party and it's only the small donors who fund the parties. And the New York Times bought that 100% with the line that we'd cleanse the parties of the evil of big money. But what McCain-Feingold did, and then was made constitutionally correct by the Supreme Court later in the Citizens United, was saying billionaires and corporations can't give big money to the parties, but they can spend it outside the parties. They can spend it as long as it's, quotes, separate from the candidates, just advertising on the issues or helping indirectly the candidates or arguing for positions. And it backfired. Number one, it weakened legislative competence and it weakened state parties by taking away the money that went to the state parties. And it discouraged the people that were expected to benefit from the loopholes were big corporations. But Fortune 500 corporations don't want to take sides in a primary and then have to face the senator they ignored and insulted when they funded the other senator in a campaign. And they don't want to be so controversial as funding the party because parties are okay. Instead, the people that benefited from McCain-Feingold were billionaires who didn't care about any consumers. The Coke Industries, one of the biggest privately owned companies in the country, makes most of their money from pipelines. I defy anybody here to tell me how, short from selling their car, they can boycott a pipeline. Or tell me which pipeline carried the oil from the oil company where you get your gasoline or your whatever your fuel you use in your home. And when the money left the party and put it in the hands of, say, Paul Singer with his 12 or 13 billion private family hedge fund, that's all his money, he doesn't have clients, or Sheldon Adelson, people who go to casinos don't care that much about the little issues as long as gambling is legal. These people had suddenly the center stage of funding candidates almost completely. And what this did is wipe out much of the power of the actual party leaders and put the power into ads that nobody knows who finance. The only way we know how to judge most political advertising is to know who paid for it. And it's now very easy to have shadow giving money from one foundation to another to a fourth, and nobody can pin the money on the people who gave it. And all the House leaders since then of the Republicans have talked during the time they were in office or after of how this weakened them. Denny Hastert said that when the money came to the parties, it had a homogenizing effect because you'd use the money to help build the consensus. But nobody gives $50 billion or $50 million for a compromise. Anybody who's worth $10 billion thinks they know it all, as one $3 billion or $4 billion person confided to me, that they think they know the answer and they want it done immediately. And they want it all. They don't just want a nibble here or there. They want the whole game. And John Boehner, who was hit worse by this, time and again had compromises that were as good for his party, he thought, as for the Republicans. And extremists would say, we want all or nothing, which would give Obama a bigger gain than he would have gotten normally. And his attitude was, it's hard to negotiate when you're standing with your party naked. I mean, he had nothing to offer, basically. And
so
Paul
you have
Ryan
a line. You have a line in your book where you say, "Moving the money moves the party."
It moved to the extremes. The money went to extremes of the party. The progressives this or the anti-everything that, and it made it much harder to agree on anything. And Ryan said it's like a parliament with no coherence because he was dealing with a group unlike any other group in at least 150 years in America. Republican historians have said there's never been anything like the Freedom Caucus, a caucus that refuses to support anything unless it's as pure and as conservative as they want. They even stopped at one point moves by Donald Trump to end Obamacare because they thought he left just enough Obamacare so it could come back. And by insisting on everything or nothing, Obamacare still stands to this day.
So I'm going to take the liberty of reading a little passage from your book.
Oh.
So here it is. In 2016, a businessman so discredited that he could no longer get a casino license or borrow money from an American bank was elected President of the United States. How did this happen? How could Donald Trump, armed only with a bare bones campaign operation, a few powerful slogans, and almost complete ignorance of any policy issues, manage to beat a field of prominent, well-funded GOP governors and senators and then win the presidency? Why did you start this book this way?
I wanted to point out the unusual situations where when you are closely examined, you don't succeed. Donald Trump couldn't get a loan from any bank except the one foreign bank. And he tried to get casino licenses in several states and was turned down after all of the games he played and the bankruptcies and the hedging the law on the edge here and there in New Jersey. And it's the difference between when people look very closely at what am I actually getting for my money versus listening at a distance and saying, how good does this sound? And it's easy to sound good, but it's hard to pass the test of, do we know enough about you to think you could actually do it? And in the old days, I didn't realize that people were running who'd built their record entirely in the Senate. And the game has changed now. People run for the president to make a name, to do something else afterwards. You have candidates, some of them are brilliant in their ways. Pete Buttigieg is as eloquent as any moderate in decades. Ben Carson, who faded very quickly after being a leader for a while in the Republican primary, is one of the first persons to do the brain surgery to separate Siamese twins. So say what you think about his ideas about religion or government, Ben Carson was a world great as a surgeon. But what does that have to do with being president? What do they know about where's the coffee cups in the White House? Or what is it you need to pass a bill? Donald Trump could win because the system had been opened up so wide with primaries and new media and money that nobody whose future depended on whether Donald Trump could do the job had any power. It was all in the hands of people who had totally lost faith in the Republican Party between 2006 and 2016. And it happened in large part because of the craziness that the money caused when Obama won.
That was going to be my question: is how did we get here with Donald Trump?
Well,
I mean, how did that happen?
Okay, Barack Obama wins, and he won, not just because of the new voters. The John Kerry's vote from 2004 in each state would have been enough to give Barack Obama's first campaign as many electoral votes as Donald Trump got in 2016. So there was a stay-at-home Republican group who gave up the party after the disappointments of G.W. Bush doing nothing that he promised about improving the health or Social Security. In fact, trying to privatize it, the war, the debacle of Katrina. And there was a white fright. All sorts of people who were worried about a black president became much more worried when he did the American Affordable Health Care Act, the Obamacare for short. Many people assumed it's bad for us because it'll take from our Social Security and our Medicare to help people who just got here who haven't justly earned that money that we have earned. And that was a real fear. And it led to the rebellions of 2010, which were half grassroots worries and concerns after the banking crash, and half steered by big money groups and active Republican organizers who saw a way to raise money and start a new movement. It was a combination of real fright and worry about the future for whites if a black president did so much for minorities and immigration, and a concern with what their future was. Now, ironically, and it's very important, 80% of the Tea Party voters, the people who were the new wave of 2010, 80% of the people who supported that group supported Social Security and Medicare. The turning it against those came from the big money and not the grassroots of these campaigns. This was the Koch brothers who funded the Americans for Progress and all sorts of other groups like Club for Growth. When the Koch brothers had their first meeting in 2009 after the Obama campaign, before the inaugural, I believe, or possibly the end of 2008, they had a meeting. The people in the meeting were worth over $250 billion in net worth. 18 of them alone had, in 2008 and 9 money, $214 billion. And there were many others who were only worth a couple $100 million at this meeting. And it was all being organized to stop the redistribution, to stop strengthening of EPA. Many of these people were in the energy industry or mining. And it was very much weakened government. And they'd already been supporting a lot of anti-government, creating more distrust in government as a way of keeping people from wanting government to do more regulation. And the party trying to, everybody was trying hard to look like the bravest and go far in the House in 2010 to 12. 65 bills were voted on and passed in the House, which of course never got anywhere in the Senate or the presidency, to ban or abolish all of Obamacare, to make sure the money was there for the other programs. And in 2012, to get support from all the moneyed groups now that were so powerful, Mitt Romney had to repudiate the health care plan he passed in Massachusetts, which was praised when he did it by the very conservative Heritage Foundation. And when Donald Trump did one thing that I certainly did not understand was valuable for him during Obama's first term, and that was to be the most public person doubting that Obama was a legal citizen with the right to be president. It was his way of saying, a black doesn't deserve to be president in my country. I think only a white president is legitimate. And a good third or more of the Republican Party loved that and was happy to say he's not legitimate, he doesn't belong there. I think I always felt that way about Al Davis and the Oakland Raiders after the way they cheated and beat the Chargers in a playoff game. So I know those feelings about so and so doesn't belong in the White House. I would never say they're not a citizen, but I would say something different than that. But what that did was give him standing as one of us for the people that were feeling on the outside of all this metrosexual, all of the getting together of the races, the kind of people who like all the ethnic foods and live in cities like I do. And there were more people who didn't like that when he got going on his programs than I realized. And the one thing most of Donald Trump's lines, even promising to build a wall, literally every line except one of his was already said by other candidates. And the one thing he did that none of the others would do was that he said, if necessary, he would tax the rich to protect Social Security and Medicare. And that was the difference between him and people like Ted Cruz, who spent a year destroying Marco Rubio and any hope of a compromise bipartisan immigration plan by saying we don't have to give any amnesty to people because that would be wrong because they broke the law to come early, and immigration should be legal and there should be no amnesty, and we don't need an amnesty, we can solve the problem without it. But he didn't have the guts to say what Trump said, which is, well, then we'll kick him out.
So Sam, when we look today at where we are, looking ahead to 2024, let's kind of project into the future here. Is the GOP now the party of Trump?
The GOP is the party of Trumpism. The GOP is not necessarily the party of Trump. And I can say that confidently because this didn't start with Trump, and there's no reason it should end with Trump. I mean, Donald Trump brought in to the fore, he said what a lot of people were saying, and now a lot of other Democrats and Republicans are saying the same things thanks to Donald Trump. But there are very few things that he can do that aren't being done by others who are willing to go against him and say they can do it better or they know how to do it. There's real splits on this in the party. I'll give you an example. If you looked at Kevin McCarthy, you'd say, well, he's a California Republican, and Mitch McConnell, he's Kentucky. But Kevin is the man of the House, and the House is where you get the radicals, and either on the progressive left side or the very conservative Republican side that moved the Republican Party to the right. Kevin McCarthy says the GOP is now the party of American workers. The Democrats are the party of corporate America. He's given up on the Fortune 500 companies that don't want to support a lot of the issues that are so divisive now. And at the same time, Mitch, even after Charlottesville and later, every time there's a fight, he calls the Fortune 500 leaders and says, I understand you're okay with me. The Senate is still your support on your side. And he even went so far after January 6th as to get Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, and the Democratic lead, and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to send a letter together to Donald Trump saying, we are disinviting you from coming to the inaugural. He wanted the leaders of the two parties to get together, bipartisan, and say to Donald Trump, you are not welcome. And Kevin McCarthy couldn't do it. He had too many people in the House that would never forgive him. It was the House where everybody, 2/3 of the Republicans voted to not accept the vote that night. But how difficult the divide is in the House, I have to point out, there were 2 votes on Liz Cheney. One was a vote in public to keep her in her job, and she won 140 to 60. The next vote was an open vote to replace her, and she was out. So there's a fear of Trump, but it's not uniform. He has gone wild to stop the infrastructure bill. And now you see the Kevin Mitch divide again. In the House, they're talking about taking away committee assignments from anybody who voted for the infrastructure bill. In the Senate, Mitch McConnell was asked if he's going to the signing ceremony. He said, I have other things to do, but this bill is good for the country, and I'm glad it passed. And then he said, this bill was basically written in the Senate by a bipartisan group of Democrats and Republicans. In other words, the hell with Donald Trump. And in fact, Kevin Cramer from South Dakota, a very Trumpy state, said, look, the only problem with this bill is that Donald Trump didn't say it, didn't write it. This is a Trump bill. You know, he said it's a Trump bill, except he doesn't have his name on it. And so
Sam, is there a way back for the GOP? Is this the beginning?
Well, there is a way back, but the way back always has losers as well as winners. Somebody in the coalition has to take less. I think, and they have to, and it only begins with somebody building a coalition of elected Republicans. If I studied in my conclusion, I gave short summaries of a very large amount of work I did on how Eisenhower overcame all the resistance of conservative Republicans to the United Nations or NATO. And I studied how Nixon brought things back into constitutional order after Goldwater. And not necessarily that's something everybody would like, but you can't say did not work as a party that could pass legislation. And I looked at how and I was there for the Bill Clinton and the Democratic Leadership Conference as part of that campaign. And the problem is there isn't a coalition of elected officials willing to stand up for much yet because Donald Trump threatens them. So there's quiet groups and there's open groups, and at some point somebody is going to have to break, and I think they're either going to have to break as a group with the most wealthy donors or with parts of the evangelical church. Now, I thought the break with evangelicals of going farther than the Fortune 500 want on gay marriage, going farther than the majority of Americans want on abortion, I thought that would happen after Donald Trump won the primary. You know, the most evangelical state in America is South Carolina. The evangelical movement every 4 years before the South Carolina primary anoints somebody. No surprise, in 2016, they anointed Ted Cruz as the chosen one, the one who could lead us to the promised land and restore biblical purity to America. Donald Trump won anyway. Nobody seems to, the press was shocked by this. They didn't seem to notice that in the past, 2 statewide referenda passed allowing gambling in South Carolina. So there's a certain evangelical front, but a lot of people don't mind an evangelical church as long as they can bet on who's going to give the sermon, or they can bet on the game while they're praying. So you need a coalition of elected. The elders are all never Trumpers, and the ones who retire from the House and Senate are mainly, speaking to a different audience now, and they're either former Trumpers who have seen the light or never Trumpers. They don't matter. You need elected officials to work with you and defend you to come up with lines that can work. I don't think it's there yet. It's somebody is going to have to find a way. And I think there are two people in a position who might be able to do it. Until a week or two ago, I would have said bet on Ron DeSantis as the one who can get the nomination and have a shot at the White House. DeSantis, who can play all sorts of silly games, in my mind, with COVID and Florida, is popular enough and careful enough that he hasn't offended any of the national groups very much. He will only offend Trump if he runs, but he'll run only if he sees Trump is in no position to run. And I think if Donald Trump doesn't run, he still has $750 million he's raised to stop the steal. And it's not clear to me that that money is campaign money as defined. I suspect that money may never get spent on a campaign, but that may just be my cynical attitude about what people do when they've raised a lot of money. Now, this is where I think we stand. This or young Governor Youngkin, who just won in Virginia. This is a man who got more votes out of the woodwork and the small towns and the hills and the Appalachians than Donald Trump ever got in Virginia. And at the same time, he's one of the leaders of the Carlyle Group, which is about as in as any position can be in America. I mean, this is a group that has more former presidents and people like James Baker and the others. This is a powerful corporation around the world. And if you can come out of Carlyle and be folksy enough to really rouse the vote in the country that never went for Obama, James Webb's part of the state, you're in a very good position to go forward and do what's necessary.
So Sam, I'm gonna ask a question that probably lots of people are wondering at this point in time, and I'm gonna give you a very famous quote. Winston Churchill once wrote, "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." So, are the Democrats next? Is it inevitable that their party will crack up?
Crack-ups are guaranteed to be inevitable in America. What's different is how much harder it is now with the money in the media. You can't, without a miracle that gives you 6 votes on the Supreme Court in a short period, you can't change the way big money can go anywhere. You can't change that easily. And you can't roll back the media clock. When things really hummed along with even Truman and Roosevelt or Eisenhower and Johnson working together, you didn't have so many networks and you didn't have so much outside money. It used to be, as Jerry Seib pointed out in the Wall Street Journal, you want to run for Congress, the first thing you do is pay a call on the Republican or Democratic National Committee and say, I'm thinking about running for Congress. What should I do? And they'll look you over, and if they think you fit, they'll send you to the right people to talk to. Now, you might go first to Americans for Progress, or you might go to one of the groups that's funded like their group, or you might go to, when he was Sheldon, now Miriam Adelson, who has $40 billion to invest in candidates that fit her views, or you might go to people like the Wilkes brothers who supported Ted Cruz, who have a very large fortune made in the energy industry in fracking, who are also very serious, devout, they're really serious religious evangelicals. And they might want a candidate like Cruz who they think will do better. I don't know, but there's all these possibilities, and everything that's happened with the media and with money has made it harder for the party to get over the breakup. I believe when there's a solid core that won't crack in a party, then it's harder. And there is a solid group that nobody wants to really threaten right now, and that is the African American the Black Caucus in the Democratic Party are the middle class right now. They're the more moderate, joining with the suburbanites on most issues or with the progressives on others. But younger African American congressmen are not as patient as their elders who have learned that you only get things done in America so far, step by step. They all think, well, it's time to do it all at once. That doesn't work so well. I mean, I wish I could have played God with all these votes on the infrastructure package and said, pick the ones that you know can be done by the government as it exists without strengthening the infrastructure. Remember, Obamacare took 5 years to get it working right online. The government, when it starts a new program, takes a lot of work. The money that was allocated for people to help with rent is almost all unspent because no state had the apparatus set up to do it. Do something you know how to do and rebuild some of the crust in government that people have spent hundreds of millions to destroy. As we speak, some of the anti-vaccine money is coming from Americans for Progress, the same group that was supporting the Tea Party and is now trying. They require vaccinations in much of Koch Industries, but they don't want the government to have trust restored. All this distrust in government is good for some people.
So we have a question that might kind of fold into what you're saying here from Molly Hauser Schneider. She says, thank you, Sam. Can you discuss a little bit about what can be done going forward and the problem of collective responsibility?
One of the things we have to do is take in, well, let me start one piece at a time. Much of the worst money is what we call dark money. It's given to somebody, to a group, and you don't know who funded them to do it because the IRS does not have strong enforceable rules with staff on how you can spend money from one nonprofit to another. There's a shell game that goes on in both parties between nonprofits. And it means you see a lot of ads that may sound good without the warning you would get when you find out this is money from anti-union people or this is money from people who are pro-union people. You need to know something about the motives of the people before you can understand what to do about what they've said. And that's a very important question, and I'm grateful for it. The other part of it is the reason there are so many powers in the hands of the president that can be misused, as we learned in the last year of President Trump, or used in ways that weren't intended. Maybe misused is a political liberal word. Unintended uses, that would require a more efficient, fast-moving House and Senate. The president gets powers like fast track on trade or special provisions. You can do things without a vote because everything the House and Senate does takes so long. So we need the kinds of reforms that would speed them up. One thing would be to drastically cut the number of people that need hearings in the House to be in their position. This has been a real problem. I mean, now Ted Cruz is holding up almost everybody going for an ambassador's appointment on the grounds he doesn't like Biden's policy on Russia, and won't approve anybody till one of the policies is changed.
So I think we have time for one more question, and this one comes close to my heart, Sam, and that is, I'm hoping you can talk about how the media has changed and how it has played into this whole political scene we've been talking about.
Well, you're one of the people who's only here because of the negative changes. You are so needed today because, well, the parties are now in constant competition because in any election, there's a 50-50 chance the House or Senate can flip. And that's been happening. It happened since Newt Gingrich brought the Republican Party into parity with the Democrats. In any election, the House or Senate is likely to flip. that means elections are national and there's more uniform news coverage of the election and more personalities that are national personalities. So the news is more and more focused nationally. That is great for the Washington Post, the New York Times, and a few national magazines who are really doing very, very well on the left and the right in the Wall Street Journal with the number of subscribers in Fox News. But it's death to local news. And I spent my life spending hundreds of millions of dollars. The people watching me today have donated to campaigns. I give money to iNewsSource because we are so deficient on local news. It's lucky that we know anything about the cities, starting with Craigslist destroying the very, very profitable want ad sections of the papers and those little ads to sell your dog or your camera, all of that leaving the newspapers. And then Google taking over with the digital ads and the ability to target you because of the TV show you're watching or where you shop for your groceries. That has been very, very hard on the newspapers. We're fortunate that the man who bought the LA Times bought the San Diego Union and is at least giving us some of a paid paper. But without that and iNewsSource, we'd be empty. I mean, I give to iNewsSource when I have to say no to a candidate to do it because it's one of the only lines of defense we have left for a very large amount of money. The San Diego County budget is over $7 billion. For years, they left hundreds of millions of dollars on the table in Washington because they just didn't care about the programs. If we had known about those programs, I think at least a few of them would have been, implemented through outrage. It's very hard to learn about these things without encouraging the independent sources like Lorie's. And it's part of the reason I asked her to do this, so I could find a way maybe to throw in a plug, and I'm glad I managed to get one.
Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate that. We are a nonprofit, by the way, for those of you who do not know about iNewsSource. We're a nonprofit 501c3 who survive on contributions like those that Sam and his wife generously give us.
Well, I'm very glad to do this, and thank you, Lorie and Julie, for inviting me to have this opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Sam. This was great fun.
It was a great conversation. Lorie, do you do a podcast or is it just strictly through the other channels that you put your stories out?
We have a website of our own, certainly. We don't do an independent podcast. We've talked about it, but we do radio, and the radio stories you will hear through KPBS.
Excellent. Yeah, you're right, Sam. It's journalism. We need more journalists, and we need more journalists to be able to make money at being a journalist.
I don't know it's actually as important as local bookstores.
Yeah, honestly. Nice little plug on that too, Sam. Thanks.
Well, it's true. I mean, you wander in a bookstore and you feel at home when you see the books and it's your neighborhood or your kind of books.
Right. It's all about it's dispersing information and getting people educated. It's such an important part of it. And I could have asked you questions about, should we continue, what about teaching civics in school? Because I'm sure that Donald Trump doesn't know how to get a bill passed, because I bet he didn't take civics.
We also do a lot of talking about media literacy. I speak to groups about understanding fake news and misinformation and how you can tell what's misinformation. Right. I mean, there's so much going on out there now that people are just can't figure out. They can't navigate. It's really important.
It's so important. Well, both of you, thank you so much for your time. Sam, do you have a website that you can send people to too? Is it?
I have not been doing. I have not been. I'm going to start one, but I haven't done it yet.
Okay.
I was just recovering from writing. The book left me in post-traumatic stress for a bit.
I bet.
Trying to force yourself to focus on the parties and not the latest tweet from the president was hard work. He's very, very, very good at what he does whether or not it fits what you normally expect.
Well, you're absolutely right with that. We need your voice out there too. I think you need to do a podcast. If you don't do a website, do a podcast.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the encouragement.
Yeah. This was a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad that we hosted both of you. Sam's book, Crack Up, order it from Warwick's. Lorie, thank you very much.
Thank you. Our website's right behind me.
And somebody posted in the comments the link to it as well. So we're making it easy for everybody. So good night. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good night.